It's not really over to him, it's over to me, but no, I'm just going to share a short thought I have been thinking about the last few weeks. I've been reflecting on moments God's given us, and also on the story of Ezekiel a little bit. So it's just two main points really, which is that there are moments in our life that happen to us. Sometimes it comes in the form of a question, or in the form of a thought, or in something you feel you should just do. And actually, it's only looking back that you realise the significance of those moments that God has given you. And when I was thinking about the story of Ezekiel, I was thinking about an encounter he had with God where, you'll know the story, it's a famous story where God shows him a valley of dry bones. And it's the question that he asks Ezekiel that's probably the moment in Ezekiel's life that is transformative. And that he asks him, can these bones live? God knew the answer, we all know that. But actually, he was challenging Ezekiel. He was giving Ezekiel a moment to do something with that question, and actually helps him along. He takes him right into the middle of that valley of dry bones. And the second thing that I want to, so first thing is grab your moments, and second thing is that actually when we speak things out, things change. And it was only when Ezekiel started to prophesy or speak out that these bones could live that it actually started happening. God could have done it, but he didn't. He wanted Ezekiel to have his moment and then speak it out. So those two things I just feel that God's encouraging you to do. When moments come along that seem insignificant, grab them and then speak out what God's saying.
Yeah, and I just had a couple of things to maybe add to that or go with it, because I always do. I just felt it was God had given me two words. He woke me up yesterday morning, and I felt that he had to say, the word, the expression I got was, you're at this threshold of something new, okay? And I actually felt it's for probably quite a lot of people in this room. You've actually been at a place in your life where this is now, you've finished one season, you're about to start a next season, but you're at that, you almost like that door's open and it's available to you, but you're in the kind of almost, should I go through the door or not? And I really just want to encourage you that God's got a lot ahead of you, and it doesn't really matter if you're the toddler in here or if you're the person who's been retired for more than 6 months, okay? It doesn't really matter that aspect. I really just feel God saying there's a lot more for you to actually enter into, and not to think that your years actually discount you from that or actually discredit from that. Your years actually count towards you. Because when you're younger, you have more energy and enthusiasm, but when you're older, you have more grey hair and you have more wisdom, okay? And so I want to just encourage you to take what God has given you and just to come and run with that just now. And also felt God saying is the expression about the threshing floor. Okay, now I'm not a farmer. I have no idea about farming, but I really just felt the expression of the threshing floor, and I felt there's two parts to that, which is actually for some of you, you've actually seen a lot of God's harvest in your life, and it's almost like, well, and it kind of linked a wee bit together, which is I've seen all this harvest, but what do I do next? Okay, this sounds slightly bleak, but is my life over? Okay, but your life isn't over, because actually God's actually got more for you ahead. And there's also a bit where the threshing floor speaks to me of you're going through a lot of process, and some of that process is uncomfortable. It's actually dealing with a lot of stuff. But in the midst of that, all you've felt is actually the difficulty and the pain. But actually God's saying, look, that is one of the most productive times in your life, because I've actually taken all the things and all the hindrances and all the issues that you've been working through. I've been moving all of those so you can now really just actually accelerate in the things I have for you. Okay, so that's just, you get that for free. That's because I managed to get to Bostocks before I got here. God does hear my prayers. So today I want to talk a little about heritage, and you can move that way. So I have my helper today, and I just want to make sure I can manage this right. So I want to talk about heritage, and I want to talk about, I'm going to use the life of Moses a wee bit to just explain what I mean by heritage. And the phrase that I had on the previous slide was, what we do in life echoes in eternity. For those of you who recognise that, it's from Gladiator, Russell Crowe's famous speech. I actually saw it a few weeks ago. He put up, I don't know how this, but it came up on Instagram. It says, "I took my family to work," and he's at the Colosseum in Rome. Thought it was quite amusing. If you haven't seen the film, then that joke is totally lost on you. So what do I mean by heritage? And what I mean is it's really something of value and importance from the past, which either in today's life either keeps its value, maintains, or actually increases in value. And the aim is it actually carries on to the future as well. So there's an element of which it's past, it's present, and it's future. Okay. If I had a longer mic cable, I'd be over here, here, and there. Past, present, future. Okay. Because it's meant to continue. It's not meant to stop. Okay. I'll give you an example. In my family line, we have a heritage of church leadership. Okay. Some would say it's a good heritage, some would say it's a bad heritage, but it's in my family line. And like my great-grandfather on one side, my grandfather on the other side, and I probably feel like my parents should have been church leadership as well, but my mum lived in a name and in a denomination that didn't encourage that, okay? And my father chose not to, okay? And so it's in my family line, it's almost like in my heritage is that I have an option, which means that that's going to happen. That's going to be something that's going to come up in my life. And it will probably come up in my son's and my daughter's life. And some of the challenges I've listened to over the last few years, I would say it's definitely a calling on their life they can choose to be part of. It's almost like it's part of their spiritual DNA. And then when I talk about destiny, we hear a lot of this. I'm not going to talk about destiny too much, but it's really the aspect of what God has called us to do. And for me, that's like a present picture. But these all overlap. And then the last bit is, I wanted to mention legacy. You hear people talk about this, how I know normally in dodgy films, right, okay, where, and when I say dodgy, I don't mean anything inappropriate, but I mean where you've got somebody who's trying to build a criminal legacy, or they're trying to build a news empire legacy, or some kind of business empire that lasts. But we're talking about something different here. And it's that aspect of building something that is for God. And one of my key points is that one person's legacy should become another person's heritage, okay? So what is built before is something that is available for you to pick up and to run with, okay? And that can be an individual heritage with your family, or it can be cultural. It can be to do with, something from God as well. So I want to just expand on that, but it should be a continual process. A few weeks ago, pretty much all of my family, apart from me, were leaders at a Christian youth camp. Okay, now the Christian youth camp started nearly 60 years ago, and when that person set that up, I went as a camper, obviously only a few years ago, but now my children have went as campers, and they've now become leaders. Okay, and there's a heritage there of all those thousands of young people who have been impacted by God all those years. For me, it's like, and the point that maybe comes back to what Alan said earlier, which is when you look at something, you do not understand the impact on not just your generation, but the generations to come of what you do. Those small choices that have a massive impact for your future. And the picture on the screen at the moment, and this is a kind of simple picture of legacy, which is that's Leonardo da Vinci, right? Leonardo da Vinci cannot just do a normal set of stairs, okay? And the reason why I want to pick that picture and to explain it a wee bit is we live and we recognise the skill and the creativity, but actually the thing I want to pick up on is when we actually tap into some of the attributes of God, then that's when we actually see something of the legacy of God actually established. Often we look at something and be like, well, actually, where's God in that? But actually, the things that last are where somebody has actually tapped into the attributes of God and demonstrated that attribute of God. And this is what Leonardo da Vinci did. He actually understood some of the creativity of God, and he actually communicated that out. In this situation, he's communicating it through stonework. Leonardo da Vinci, one of my favourites. I have no clue about architecture or even art, but actually I love some of the stuff he does. And just one point, I think this is revelation. I don't have a verse to substantiate that, so you have to take it within that context. But I feel that when you have a shared heritage, it actually attracts other people with a similar heritage, okay? And it can be in all different types of ways. So it means like you may find you actually end up marrying someone who years to come you realise that a lot of your grandparents, your great-grandparents, had similar type of heritage, okay? This is a simple example, but when my daughter was in California 10, 11 years ago, two of her best friends, one was from New Zealand, and one was, historically, was from South Korea. And God spoke to me, like, well, you have a shared heritage, that's why they all got on so well. And I'm like, how can you have a shared heritage? They're from 3 different continents, right? And then God said, well, actually, New Zealand was impacted by Scots missionaries almost 200 years ago, as was South Korea. In fact, the Bible in South Korea was translated by a Scots missionary. So they had a shared heritage when they actually kind of came together. That's what joined them together. And my point in that, there is a point normally when I get there. My point in that is actually, you'll find you have friends that you don't know why you like them, and you don't know what you have in common. But I want to encourage you to explore the things in God that you have in your history, because that may be something He's brought you together to actually do and to actually accomplish in His kingdom. We'll try to work out communication methods to get my daughter to change the slides at the right time, so she's not keen on some of my proposed. And to be honest, I was actually thinking I might pull a muscle if I go over the top. So let's look at significance. Every one of us is born to be significant, okay? There's no option that, because that's what God has made us as. And just some verses with regards to that. Psalm 139:14, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Ephesians 2:10, for we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus, so we can do the good things He planned for us long ago. And before I shaped you in the womb, I knew all about you. Before you saw the light of day, I had holy plans for you. A prophet to the nations, that's what I had in mind for you. Then Moses came on the scene, a child of divine beauty. His parents hid him from fame, but as long as they could to spare his life. After 3 months, they could conceal him no longer. And the last verse there is, faith prompted the parents of Moses at his birth to hide him for 3 months, because they realised their child was exceptional, and they refused to be afraid of the king's edict. Now, obviously, we all accept that all our children are exceptional, but this was slightly different. So I want to just state, God hasn't made any mistakes in making you. He hasn't made a single mistake in making you. You're made perfectly. And when David wrote this psalm, he wasn't perfect, yet he thanks God. And I think some of us, we need to actually take on that different perspective. Because I think actually David is actually speaking from God's perspective here rather than his own perspective. If you read through the Psalms, you'll see time and time again how David is actually more than aware of his own failings, but yet he realises how much God has done. And when Ephesians talks of how we are God's masterpiece, that would be something that I often find myself in disagreement with God on. A lot of times I don't actually feel like I'm actually God's masterpiece. Okay? But actually, if I've got a poor view of myself, if I don't see myself as being significant, and I see myself as being insignificant, okay, if I don't see myself as being God's masterpiece, then that means that my actions are going to follow suit. I'm going to actually start to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the less significant I am, the less I see as being important, and the less what I can do, it comes across as being important. And I love the verse in Jeremiah where it says, I had holy plans for you. It's before it was even shaped in the womb, God already had a plan for Jeremiah. And it's exactly the same for each of you here. Every one of us here, God had plans even before we were born. He already had plans for us to actually see what we're going to do within our lives. And those plans are not at the expense of the person next to you. That's always a bit of a challenge, okay? When you sit next to someone and you think, are they better at that than me? I'm quite competitive, have been over the years of my life. I'm slightly more chilled now. Stop that, okay? It's like probably your wife and your daughter here, I have critics. So in that whole picture of just understanding, that we don't want to actually kind of compete with other people. We actually want to learn from other people. And one of the values you have as an individual is that you're completely different from me. Okay? I can never be you. You're never meant to be me either. Okay? We all contribute something differently. All your years, all your experience, all the things that God has done in your life, all your history of God, I don't have that history. And any wisdom that is within me is I should learn from the history you have with God and learn from the attributes that you have that reflect who God is. Now the background, so the background to this next section is that God used Joseph to rescue Egypt from famine. And Pharaoh's now died, and the Pharaoh who is now in command has no knowledge of Joseph and God saving Egypt. And Moses is just about to be born, and it's about 60 so years afterwards. And if we read that first verse, verse 1, Exodus 1:22, Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. You can hear the fear, okay? In the previous verses it talks about the fear that Pharaoh has because he's scared of what will happen because the Hebrew people have grown to such a large number. And it's always that, for me, if you start off in a fearful position, it's not going to go well. And you start to do things which are not particularly sensible. And this is Pharaoh's response, which is, I'm just going to start killing everybody, okay? That's not really a rational response to that. And so, Exodus 2 talks there about how Levi has went and taken a wife. And so the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bull meshes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. She had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. I find it interesting, we never actually know Moses' proper name. Okay, that's just a side point. That's one to think about in the middle of the night. Now, the children of Israel, so Moses has actually been born into a land of slaves. The children of Israel, they would rather be counting sheep. Sorry, it's a poor one, I know. But instead, these are tent dwellers. but they're now actually building pyramids. They're totally unskilled and untrained. It's not in their nature to actually even live in cities because they're used to be living in the desert. And here they are having to build the buildings. And obviously, Jochebed, Moses' mother, she's pregnant. It must be really difficult knowing that her child, if it's a boy, is under a death sentence. And if it's a girl, will be used by Pharaoh. And so when that moment of birth comes, it's going to be with mixed emotions. Delight at birth, but also dread at what can happen. And you can see the parallel with our own lives. When we're born, we're actually born into a life of slavery. We're born into a life which actually has a death sentence against it until we come into a relationship with Jesus and we step out of that slavery and we step into life. But that way into life is through a choice and it's through faith. And I like the verse where it talks about how well done. That she saw that he was a beautiful child. She had him 3 months. But also that she could no longer hide him. She took an ark. So Jochebed recognises Moses' value. Now, Moses is the third child. Okay? So they've had 2 previous children, but recognises that Moses is different. Personally, I always think the youngest child is the most significant one. It's maybe why I like Moses so much, having an older brother and sister. I'm on the same line as Moses. But it tells in Hebrews how that is by faith they hid him, believing that he would be saved. I just think that's quite amazing. Like in that situation, that they have the faith to believe that Moses is going to be saved, so they hide him, so they recognise it and they take action. They believe that God is going to do something. You can contrast that with Pharaoh, because Pharaoh in his situation has so much fear but compared to their faith stepping in. So after 3 months, you would think, okay, we're good. We've had faith for 3 months. But what do we do now? Because we can't keep the baby quiet anymore. Okay, we've all been in that situation probably where it's just like it's not possible. And so when each of us have had situations in our lives where we've had faith to see God do something, but what happens when it moves to that next stage? What happens when it comes to a challenge of, okay, God, I had faith for that, but what about faith for the next stage? What do you do in that situation? And what do they do? What have they got faith for? And so one of a couple of expressions put up there, definitions of faith, is by Bill Johnson says, faith doesn't deny a problem existence, it denies a place of influence. And then Graham Cook, there are 2 things you can look at. You can look at the problem or you can look at the promise. You have to live by faith because you have to believe that God is there when everything says that he is not. To me, those are very big challenges. What do you do when you don't know and you can't see? Okay. When we went to California, somebody came up to us and said, you have got the most amazing faith to go halfway around a world with your kids. Actually, it didn't feel like faith at all. It felt like the most obvious thing in the world to do. It felt like that was the thing. It was almost impossible not to do it. Okay? Does that mean I had amazing faith? I'm not sure it did. I have that question in my head because it just felt so normal. And part of me believes that faith should be so great within your life that when you go to do something, it shouldn't necessarily feel like faith because it's all about your confidence in God. It's all about when you see something that's in the unseen, you bring it into reality. It's about taking into where God has a viewpoint of something and you bring God's viewpoint into that situation. And so, what do they do here? Because what have they got faith for? So the tension is between that point where they've seen God do something for the first 3 months, but where do they go next with that? Okay. So moving onwards, we can't really talk about faith at all without looking at Hebrews. I feel that's almost like an unwritten rule. Maybe it is a written rule somewhere. I know it's probably one of Paul's rules. You can't go through this without referring to me. And in Hebrews, we read a wee bit about faith in relation to Moses. Verse 1 starts off with, "And now faith brings our hopes into reality and becomes the foundation needed to acquire the things we long for. It is all the evidence required to prove what is still unseen." Partly I get this verse, but partly it totally confuses me. Because it's talking about the things of God which are unseen. So my first question in that situation, God, what is it that's unseen that I have to have faith for? Because I'm wanting a simple answer to my simple question. And God doesn't give you the simple answer. He just asks you another question off the back of that, which is, well, what should be then unseen? Well, God, you tell me what should be unseen. Well, what is there to be grasped that you want to bring into reality? I'll just leave you that one. That's the next 6 months of sleepless nights. And I'll come back to it in a few minutes. But so faith, in verse 23, prompted the parents of Moses at his birth to hide him for 3 months because they realised their child was exceptional and then refused to be afraid of the king's edict. And faith enabled Moses to choose God's will. Verse 24. Verse 25 talks about Moses preferred faith's certainty above the momentary enjoyment of sin's pleasures. And then in verse 26, he found his true wealth in suffering abuse for being anointed more than in anything the world could offer him. For his eyes looked with wonder, not on the immediate, but on the ultimate faith's great reward. And in verse 27, holding faith's promise, Moses abandoned Egypt and had no fear of Pharaoh's rage because he persisted in faith as if he had seen God who is unseen. I absolutely love this verse because it's talking about how he actually didn't have fear because he persisted in faith as if he'd seen God who is unseen, but yet that hasn't happened at that point. Moses doesn't see God until many years later, till 40 years later, when he's in Mount Sinai, and he has that experience of God who actually looks upon him and sees his glory. And in verse 29, faith opened the way for the Hebrews to cross the Red Sea as if in dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to cross, they were swallowed up and drowned. Now, faith begins as hope, and indeed is unseen. So many doubt it is real. What follows is the proof that faith is a reality that can be trusted. So when you have faith for something and you see it happen, that actually provides you with that evidence. And it's an accumulative thing. It doesn't just stop, okay? So obviously, when I became a Christian, I had faith that God would save me. I did not have much intelligence round about that, okay? Now, I should have had a lot of intelligence because I was born in a church where I spent more time in church as a child than I did in school, okay? And I never missed a moment of school pretty much, okay? I even went to women's services, that's all I'm saying. I get dragged to everything. But when I said yes to God and when I had faith in God to actually save my life, I actually did not have that much intelligence about it because it's a step of faith, because we're taking something that's actually unknown to us and unseen, and we're dragging the spiritual world into our physical world. So when I acknowledged who Jesus was and who God was, that changed my life. I then experienced something. I then changed from being intangible to being, and for me, I was going to say physical, but emotional, physical, and spiritual impact within my life. And since that point, I've had multiple experiences where I've actually had faith to see God do things. And in the faith to do things, it's then actually I've seen the reality of that come true. In verse 23, I love the fact that Moses' parents choose to not, they refuse to be afraid. And fear is a big inhibitor to faith. Fear often gets in the way because I struggle with this all the time because I'm like a solutions type person. So part of my job is to look at all the problems and see all the problems, but then find solutions to them. The problem with that, if there's not too many problems in the same sentence, is that that can actually build fear in dealing with those problems. Okay, and so the point here is actually that when we look at something, we have to choose not to be afraid. When we're looking for a solution in our life and we're looking to put our faith in God, we have to look at his promise. Normally we have to find his promise and then have faith for that and not to look at the problem itself. And that is a choice. I don't think that comes easy, okay? And I don't think in this situation it was Moses' parents' first rodeo, so to speak, because I don't know if I would have ability to choose not to be fearful in that situation. For me, that's something you have to work on. So what do you do if you don't have this level of faith? Well, you can work on it. Jesus said in Mark 23, if you're able to believe, all things are possible to the believer. So what do all things mean? Well, it means all things. So what are you able to believe for? And in that situation, the boy's father said, I do believe, Lord, help my little faith. I always think that's a great example of somebody who has faith but is in the process of building more. And it feels like for me that I've got hope for that, to have more faith. And then faith enables Moses to make a choice to follow God's will. Again, the faith married with choice. So a question, what is God looking for you to have faith for today? What can you imagine for your life that you want to see God make a difference? Or what for the lives of people around about you, can you see him making a difference? Okay, so I want to do a wee bit of, well done. How faith marries with heritage, destiny and legacy. Okay, so throughout Moses' life, when he's faced with problems, we see that he actually starts to lean on his heritage, following the model his parents has established for him, and that's the beginning of a hope for solution, and it is activated by faith. And this actually brings about his destiny, but also brings about the destiny for the children of Israel, and it actually leaves a legacy. If you look at the whole of Moses' life, like he helps, God uses him to establish the children of Israel as a nation. He chooses through Moses to actually set up the whole priestly process within the children of Israel, the tabernacle. His family, Aaron becomes the chief priest. It's just like all that picture all the way through the whole process of worship, of how we meet and worship, of how you can actually have an intimate relationship with God. A lot of that it feels like it's all established, all those structures are put in place through Moses' life. And I love how that when Moses are in a situation where they need to have faith for something, like where do they go? Well, they go back to where their heritage takes them. They go back to Noah. I would love to be in the process of working this out, which is the Pharaoh has said that we have to throw this baby in the water, okay, so that he'll die. So their process is, let's look back. Where have we got somebody being saved from water within our heritage? Well, we have Noah and an ark. So they build a mini ark and put Moses in it. I just think that's amazing. Like, who comes up with that, right? Okay, it has to be God, because that to me is just like a totally illogical. It's partly sensible, but partly illogical at the same. And for me, as a solution, it's just brilliant. But they look to the heritage to actually align with what God has done before. It's partly the testimony of what's went before. And so when you've got an issue, look round about you for, well, what is my heritage, or where is our testimony for what God has actually done in other people's lives? Not just your testimony, not just your heritage, but the testimony of other people. Because if God has done something like that, he can do it again. And so I just love how they do that. They put him in an ark. And their faith is actually rewarded because he's not just saved, but he's now in the safest place in the world. Because the Pharaoh's daughter has found him, And in a land of slavery, Jochebed is now employed. She might be the only Hebrew employed in the whole of that nation to bring up Moses, her own son. I just think that is brilliant. I just feel it's like almost like Satan, you really tried to do away with this. You tried to actually have an impact on God's plans, and God has just turned it then completely. And that's that whole aspect of their faith is matched with God's power to actually bring about the deliverance of their son, but not only the deliverance of their son, but actually ultimately the deliverance of a nation. I don't know about you look back in your own life when you can see points where you chose A versus B, and you realise now that by choosing that option A, it's had a massive impact in your life. The challenge now and today is, when are you going to choose option A versus option B? Because that's going to have an impact for the rest of your life, and potentially for the rest of your, a legacy that you're establishing, not just in your family line, but potentially in this community here. We never know the big decisions until we look back the way and we see the impact of those decisions. The faith of one delivered a nation. So what is your heritage? No, don't move it. Because you have. No, again. In God, you, first and foremost, you're a son or you're a daughter of God. So you can draw on the heritage of who you are, of who your father is. And Luke 15:31, the father says to his son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. So when God speaks to you, he's saying he's always with you. He's never not there. We were watching a film about Aretha Franklin last night, and in it, at one point, she acknowledges that God has always been there, even when she's not been there for God. But God is always with you. He never leaves you, and that's it. And everything that he has is yours. That's your inheritance. That's your heritage to actually pull on. But it's a choice. God doesn't force that upon you. And I just want to say, you're never out of God's mind, okay? I had a thought yesterday that I would love to get a coffee at Bostock's. Ideally, I would get a pan and raisin as well. And it was that way. We left this morning. We left a wee bit later than I would like. I'm always known for having a wee bit of contingency, but I thought that's never going to happen. And whatever happened is we got here 20 minutes ahead of when we were expecting to. Just perfect time to drop into Bostock's and get a coffee, okay? And I really just feel like it's happened a few times recently where I've just had a thought of that would be good if that happened, and then it's happened. Normally it's involving food and it's involving coffee, but that's a separate issue, okay? That's my daughter said I should be listening to a sermon on gluttony, but I don't have that many. So what is your heritage? What's in your family? What's in your culture? In our culture here in Scotland, we were known as a country that actually loved the Bible. That's in our culture. That's part of our heritage as a nation. Part of our heritage as well is as a nation of worshippers, as a nation who actually have a heart similar to David, a nation that is ferocious but at the same time kind and compassionate and loves God. That's within the heritage that we all share here, because we're all in this room, we're all part of this culture. And so what is it you have in your heritage that you need to lean into today? And the things of God are meant to accumulate. We are never meant to start from a blank slate. Is it a blank slate? Showing my age. A blank whiteboard. Okay, we'll move up a few generations. Or a blank tablet. Or maybe blank tablets, what? 10 Commandments. Anyway, I digress. So if you think about it, when Noah steps in the ark, 8 people are saved. When Moses is placed in the ark, he's saved. When Moses needs saving from water again at the Red Sea, there's over 1 million people walk through in dry land. You get the point. The point is that whenever God does something, he actually cranks up a notch. He's not looking for us to crank it all the way up. He's just actually saying, look, just give me your faith. Give me something to work with, and I'll work with it. And then actually, as an example, Joshua does the same thing when they enter the promised land. steps around dry land as well. So it's there in your heritage to actually take what other people have done in God and carry it forward. In John 14:12, I tell you this timeless truth, the person who follows me in faith, believing in me, will do the same mighty miracles that I do, even greater miracles than these, because I go to be with my Father. That just blows my mind. If you think about everything that Jesus did, and he says at this point, you can do more than that. That's like a pause for a long period of time. Like, what does that mean? Well, it means you can raise the dead. It means you can actually see people get their sight back. It means you can see people, delivered from demons. You can see people getting their healing back. You can see the lame people walking, arms that are disfigured out, brought back into alignment. There's a whole big long list that's there, and there's a list that isn't there, that Jesus didn't even get round to because he only ministered for 3 years. I don't know about you, but that partly excites me, but partly frightens the living daylights out of me, okay? To sit and say, well, that all is possible. And God uses your heritage and your destiny to follow his kingdom. So my back was healed 20 years ago, okay? Zoe prayed for my back, okay? I'm not allowed to mention her today, but I have. My back was healed 20 years ago. Zoe prayed for me. I got in a plane. I went to Toronto. I had enough drugs in a suitcase to probably get arrested. Painkillers, I'm saying, in case I do get arrested. And when I got there, my back, after a few years, my back was healed. Okay? And then years later, I'm standing and I'm in a prayer line. I'm praying for people. And person after person after person with a bad back is asking to get prayer for healing. So it's like, honestly, in that night, maybe 20 people, all with bad backs. And I checked afterwards and I was like, did we just have like a bad back convention in town and they've just all turned to church to get prayer? And it turned out I was the only one that had prayed for anybody with a bad back. And I'm like that's kind of slightly weird, right? And I realised what it is. It's because God was using where I had faith and where I'd actually had my heritage now was through the healing of my own back, I was then able to pray for other people and see them transformed. And often that's what happens. Satan tries to kill what we have, and God uses that to launch into our destiny. So just to conclude, before my wife throws a watch at me, you're built to be significant. It's in your very being. That's who God made you to be. There's nobody discounted from that. So, and the way to get access, being significant, is actually to do what God has called you to do. And one of the tools is to look back at your heritage to see what God has done and remind yourself of that so that you can actually not just see your destiny accomplished here and for those around about you, but also to create a legacy for the future. And that is all linked together by faith, by taking what you have in place of what God has actually given you to see his kingdom come on this earth. One of the key points for me is actually seeing that intangible, having the dreams in God, the things that you have in your heart, to see that come to fruition. Often those dreams God has given you, even the stuff that you've never told anyone else about, he's looking for you to partner with him to see them happen in your lifetime. And not to give you a responsibility, but what you accomplish in your lifetime actually builds on what went before, but it's pioneering for the people who come after. For some of you in this room, you are pioneers. And so when you're a pioneer, it can feel quite lonely because you're the one that's in front of everybody else. Because you're the one that's actually, you're knocking down the walls, and actually people eventually will follow, but if you turn around, they're not even there yet. I want to encourage you, for those that are here and that's who you are, then don't feel that you're alone in that, because God's always with you. And it's like anything, most people that are pioneers, those are the ones that you cheer the loudest for, because you're the ones that ran ahead and you're the ones that actually made it easy for everyone else to come after. Okay, I'll just pray. So, Father, I just thank you for your goodness to us. I just thank you. You're such a good, good God, and you're such a faithful God. A God that's always been there for us. A God that no matter what we've done, you always throw your arms around about us and say, just come and just so it just receives your love. You didn't come ever to condemn us, but you actually came to love us back to life. And even now, every person in this place, you just want to love us and just for us to just receive that love. So, Father, we just pray for the promises of you in our lives, Lord. I just pray that you just help us just to dig them out, to look them up, to hear what you have to say, to see what you've done in our families in the years before and in this nation in the years before, and for the pioneers in the faith, Lord, that we would follow in their footsteps and see your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.